We'll start the session in 5 minutes. Hello, হ্যালো। আমি ঘরে কিন্তু আমার এনপিটিএল ক্লাসটা স্টার্ট হচ্ছে এখন। কেন গো? কেন? কি হয়েছে? হুম। হুম, হুম। আমি ভালো করে তোমাকে জানাতে পারবো। সৃষ্টি আছে, হ্যাঁ। ঠিক আছে। ঠিক আছে গো, ঠিক আছে। সাবধানে থেকো, টাটা বাই। রাখছি। টাটা। Okay, we'll start the session. This is the first TA session of Design of Steel Structures taught by Professor Damodar Maiti. I'm Trisha Chakraborty, one of the course teaching assistants. I'm a PhD student at IISc Bangalore, and I will start with an today is an introductory class, so I will start with some basic concepts. Like there are two broad branches of structural engineering: analysis and design. Now, analysis is the forward problem. Forward problem means that, for example, like you would have done a course of structure analysis in last semester. It is usually done in the a course in basic structure analysis is usually done before design of steel structures or design of RC structures. So, if you have suppose you have a beam and you would have studied bending moment diagram, shear force diagram, that is analysis because we know the structural dimensions. That means we know the width and depth of the beam, we know the length of the beam, we know the boundary conditions. Boundary conditions are like fixed hinge support, roller support, and all that. So we know everything about the structure, and we also know everything about the applied loads. It could be a UDL, it could be a triangular load, point load, it could be an applied moment, it could be any sort of loading. So I know everything about the structure, and I want to find the response induced in the structure due to the applied loading. And this response comes into usually two categories again. One is the stress type response, one is the strain type response. So in bending moment and shear force diagrams, what did you do? When we have the beam, just I'm starting with the beam problem. I have the beam, I have the loading and boundary conditions, and then when I get the bending moment diagram, uh, basically we get the bending moment distribution along the length of the beam, or the shear force distribution along the length of the beam. So that is a force or a moment response, and from that we can get the stress developed in the structure. We know that stress is force by area, and we have an expression relating moment to stress as well, my by I. So if I have the bending moment, if I have the shear force value at any cross section, like this is the beam, I know the bending moment diagram distribution, I know the shear force distribution. So at any particular section, if I ask for the stress, you will find the stress induced due to the force by dividing it by the cross sectional area. And then you will take the moment and apply the m pi by I formula. I is the moment of inertia. So from that I'll get the stress at any given cross section. So that is the stress type response. Another type of response is the deflection or the displacement or the strain type response. That for that you have studied methods like unit load method, moment distribution, those moment area theorems. One second. Hello. হ্যাঁ শুরু হয়ে গেছে পরে ফোন করি তোকে টাটা Yes. So the moment area theorems, the conjugate beam method, those were all to find out the deflection or the displacement profile along the length of the beam. So we usually get y as a function of x by using the double integration method, or by using conjugate beam method or moment area theorems, we get the displacement at a particular cross section. So that is all I need to know about. If I have the structure, all its dimensions, if I have all its loading pattern, boundary condition, and the material as well, then I have then analysis means that I need to find the stress and strain, or the forces and displacement developed at all parts of the structure. At every point of the structure, I should be able to tell that. That is what analysis is conceptually. Design is the inverse problem, because in design we approach it in a different way. In design, basically we okay, what do we basically mean by structural design? That is, in a practical context, suppose I have to build a 3-story residential building. What will I be given as an engineer? I will be given some architectural plan. So some the architects will the draftsman will give me some basic architectural plan. That means the basic floor area, some approximate arrangement of the columns, but that is not fixed, because column is a load bearing element of the structure. So ultimately the civil engineers have to they have to decide where should the columns be placed, how what should be their dimensions. So I have some soil report, then I have a broad architectural planning of each floor, and I am given the from the Indian standard codes, we have Indian standard codes for IS codes for dead load, live load, wind load, earthquake load for general structures. Like we are not considering tidal load or offshore structure loading specifically. The four types of loading are dead load, live load, wind load, and earthquake load. So we have some values. Like if it's a residential building, the live load for the floor has to be considered 2 kilonewton per meter square, something like that. And for the dead load is the self weight of the structure, and the wind load and earthquake load are specific to the area where I'm seeing. Like every zone in India is divided, it has a particular earthquake zone, and then there is a the earthquake and wind load also depends on the height of the structure. Wind load, especially, as the higher you go, the higher the wind load becomes. So I have a plan. I know the basic loads that I have to design my structure against. That means that I want my structure, whatever it is, I don't know how it will look like. I mean, I just know the broad idea. I don't know exactly where the columns and beams will be, what the material will be. I don't know that, but I know that ultimately my requirement is I have to build a structure which has to withstand these loads. And these loads, not for it, they are not given in the terms of forces or displacements. They are given in the in terms of broad loading. So now in design, what we have to do is, design is an iterative process. Analysis has a single solution. If I have a problem, if everything is defined, I just want to find the response in the structure. There can be only one answer to it. But when I'm designing, two people is perfectly likely to come up with different designs. So suppose I take M25 concrete, I take Fe500 steel, and I say that I will start with columns of dimension 300 by 400 millimeters. So I put I put the columns, I put the beams. I propose some dimension of the beam I have to propose. So I will. Usually we don't do this by hand. We usually do in softwares like STAAD and all. So in STAAD, so instead, I'm going to assign some materials. I'm going to assign some properties to all the beams and structural elements, beams and columns, and all that. Basically, floors, the floor and the walls are not considered load bearing structures usually in RC buildings. I'm talking about the general design framework right now, but I model all that instead. And then when I run the STAAD model, the first thing that STAAD does, or whatever we have to do if we are doing it by hand, is we carry out a structural analysis process. In the sense, now that I have assumed some material and dimensions and some boundary conditions and arrangement of the structure, now I move to the analysis problem. So I take the loads, the load which I have calculated from the IS codes, those I take as the applied loading, and I analyze the structure to find out all the stress and strain in the developing the structure. Then I have to carry out some checks. Like I have a material, I have assumed a material, I know that the yield stress is this much, and I have to check that at every point the developed stress should not exceed the yield stress. Then the developed deflection should not exceed the deflection limits. If everything is fine, like after my analysis, if I see that all of these inequalities are being satisfied, like the developed stresses or strains is less than the limits, then I will say that this design is fine, I can let it go ahead. But if I see that a particular column has, like a particular beam has a midpoint deflection that exceeds the limit, so I have to redesign it. Redesigning can be in the terms of, I could make the material stronger, or I could increase the dimension, I could add an additional column or a shear wall. I have to redesign it, like I have to propose another design in reinforcing the current one. And then I'm going to carry out a structure analysis again, and I'm going to carry out all of these checks again. So till all the checks are satisfied, I have to keep on redesigning it. So that's why design is called the inverse problem. We have been given some loads to be withstood broadly by the structure, and we are given some criteria on maximum deflections, and we have to find the optimum size of structural elements. And the connectivity also is important. Connectivity in the sense, like in steel design especially, there are bolts and connections between two elements. And the materials also, see, generally in practically the materials are already given by the builder. But technically, if a civil engineer has every right to ask for a stronger material. If they see that M25 concrete is not sufficing, I can ask for M30 concrete. So ultimately, I'm given nothing in design. I'm just given a broad broad idea of what the structure should look like, and I'm given the loads, and I have to build the entire structure. I have to propose a structure and see that it is safe enough. So analysis is the forward problem, design is the inverse problem, and this is a course on steel design. Okay, why do we need structure analysis? As I said, it is performed prior to the design stage. So STAD is a design software, but STAD also has all that analysis stuff inbuilt in it. So what does the analysis part do? It provides the internal forces and stresses corresponding to the design loads. It will be design, and the design load is got from IS codes, and this will typically account for the for the materials used, the applied loads, and the geometry of the structured object. Geometry means the dimensions and the connectivity. Okay. Now I'll. This is another. These were some concepts. Now, internal forces induced in a structure. There are four types. Bending moment. Bending moment occurs when an external force is applied to the element, causing it to bend. In a sense, if this is the structural element, if I apply a transverse loading, transverse means if this is the like the length, this is the longitudinal direction, this is the transverse direction. So if I apply a transverse loading, it generally tends to bend like this. So that is called bending moment. And shear force is the twin of bending moment. If there is shear force, this is shear force, like the any force that is perpendicular to the longitudinal axis, this is a shear force. This is also a shear force, but this is not a shear force. Like any force that is along the axis is not a shear force, there is an axial force, and forces perpendicular to that is a shear force. So force that acts parallel to the cross section of a structural element when an external force is applied. See, this is the cross section. So if I'm applying a force like this or this, it is basically parallel to the cross section. So that is a shear force, and shear force induces bending moment in the structure as well. So both the sense or direction of shear force and bending moment is same. And then there is another pair, torsional moment and axial force. Torsional moment is produced by a twisting force applied to the body, like this. This is torsional moment. Here, if it bends like this, it is bending moment. This is torsional moment, and you know that if this is a moment, we know that if this is a moment, then the sense of the moment is like if this is a moment, the sense of the moment is this, right? So if this is a moment, the sense is along this axis, so it is along the longitudinal axis. So torsional moment, the sense of the moment is like this, and the actual the axis is along the longitudinal direction. So moment produced by twisting force applied to the body along the transverse axis of the body. And axial force is that acts in the direction of the axis of a body. Axial force is a pulling or a like a tension or compression. It is very easy to visualize. Like if this is a member, a truss member, this pulling or pushing is like along this direction, it's an axial force. So axial force and torsional moment are oriented along the axis, and shear force and bending moment are oriented perpendicular to the axis. This is a diagram, it shows it clearly enough. This is the element. So tension or compression, if it's pointing inwards, that is, this is axial. This is shear, you can see this can be shear, and this along this also can be shear force. Bending moment is induced due to shear force generally, and torsional moment is twisting moment. The direction is along this axis again. Now, these were some very very basic concepts which you need to be clear, because this like you need to know why we are studying this subject. So analysis and design, the difference between analysis and design should be clear in your mind. Otherwise it will be like, since in UG courses we don't actually we study these theoretically, right? We solve problems, we solve them by hands, like single beam, a single column. That is not how actually when we are actually applying it in a structure, it is not so simple. We cannot do it all by hand, but we do it. We study it by a small beam or a column or a slab design, so that you know all the basics. And then when you actually go into the industry and apply it to softwares like STAAD and all, you know what is going on in the back end. So you should know the difference between analysis and design. And these are also basics. These are also usually taught in structural analysis course, but it is very important. Now I'm moving into an introduction of steel structures. So now, okay, so if you look around yourself, most of the structures you see are reinforced concrete structures, RCC structures. RCC means that the basic, the major material is concrete, and it is called reinforced because it has steel reinforcements inside the concrete. And why does it have it? Because concrete has practically no strength in tension. Concrete is strongest in compression, but it almost has no tensile capacity. If you put tensile force on a concrete specimen, it will crack. But so the task of the steel bars inside the rebars inside the concrete is to take the tension, and concrete itself takes the compression. And concrete is a much cheaper material than steel. So that's why residential building, institutional buildings, most of which we see around us are concrete structures. They are more economically viable, and they are also easier to construct because like all the contractors and all, they are used to building these. But steel is a more expensive material, and steel has some distinct advantages. So more specific and demanding structures are made by steel, like exclusively of steel. Skyscrapers, like extremely tall buildings, very tall buildings will have like the wind load becomes a very serious problem there, and deflection also becomes a very serious problem there. So usually skyscrapers can be made of steel. Bridges are often made of steel. Transmission tower, refinery well structure, water tank, high rise buildings, industrial buildings, and these factory sheds. This is a factory shed, for example. So, these are some examples of steel structures. Steel versus concrete. Now, concrete is the most versatile material for construction. Another reason is of this term versatility is that if you would have seen, all of you would have seen construction work going on anywhere, right? So when concrete buildings are cast, what is usually done, they have some sheeting or some form work of like plastic kind of materials, and you just pour the concrete inside it and wait for it to harden. So any connectivity of the beams and columns and floors you want, the slabs, it can be done with concrete very easily. But steel is not like that. You don't come and pour steel anywhere. Steel, all the steel elements are brought in solid, like in bulk from the industry or from the factories, and then you have to assemble it at the site. So it's not that versatile because you cannot usually from the factories you only get certain fixed cross sections, fixed dimensions and arrangements. So you have to work within those. Like in concrete, you can go for any dimension, like any width, any length, any sort of thing. Plus it is cheap also. So why do we go for steel? In any case, steel is much stronger than conventional concrete, in the sense like the whole stress strain diagram of steel operates at a much higher level than concrete. Even in compression, concrete is strong in compression, but steel is stronger in compression, and concrete practically has no tension, and steel has a good tensile capacity as well. So that is obviously, if you are using a expensive material, obviously it has to be stronger, otherwise no one will use it. And another distinct advantage is that steel has a very high strength to weight ratio, in the sense it's a lightweight. It's usually lightweight. You will see that as we go into problems, you will see that the dimensions of a beam, of a concrete beam, and the dimension of a steel beam have very, like they're very different. Like a concrete, for example, for a concrete column, 300 by 400 millimeters is a very common dimension. But in steel, ISMB 200 is a I section. It's a commonly used I section. The height, end to end height, is 200, that which is comparable to the 300 400 limit. But it is an I section, so it has a very thin web, like a 5 millimeter web inside, web within it, then two like flanges and a web. So it's the thickness of the flanges and webs are of the order of few tens of millimeters. So the you can see that the cross sectional area is much lesser. As a result, it's very lightweight. So these are like, of course, I'm just giving two common examples of the dimension that I use. There are much larger steel sections as well. You can build up composite sections as well, but generally steel structures are lightweight, so that's why they are used in bridges and high rise buildings, where the self weight itself becomes a very big issue. And another very important point is steel is ductile compared to concrete. And now, what is ductility? Ductility means that, in physical terms, ductility means that a material, ductility is a property of a material, not of the structure. It doesn't matter what the dimensions of the structure is or the connectivity. It matters, only the material matters here. So ductility means that a material can undergo a large amount of strain before it actually fails. So it allows a lot of deformation, and this is very important in the context of earthquake engineering. Particularly, there is an IS code called ductile detailing. Ductile detailing is important because suppose a building is undergoing a severe earthquake and it is about to collapse, but but it is made of a ductile material, and it is ductile enough that the suppose the a beam column joint is failing, it So, if it is ductile, a beam column joint, suppose it's about to fail. So, wouldn't you rather prefer that it undergoes a lot of deformation? It's bending, it's twisting, it's about to fall. You see that you have a lot of you. Then we get a warning time. We have time to evacuate. We might have time to repair it if it's not about to fail immediately. But we always want the structure to give us some warning time. Like deflection is a very strong indicator that something bad is about to happen, so we can take measures to uh, we can take measures to mitigate that like as opposed to brittle failure means it suddenly cracks and falls. So if a structure undergoes brittle failure, there is a much larger risk of loss to life, extreme loss to property. You don't have any time to even if like you don't have any time to repair it or save the structure. So ductility is important, and steel itself is much more ductile material. And even in RCC structures, when we you would have seen while the ultimate strengths are calculated in the material, we usually want the steel to fail first. We want to make it such that the concrete part of the beam is so high that the steel fails first. That means it ensures a ductile failure. So that is one point here. We'll go into ductility, what ductility means mathematically from the stress strain curve in a while, but this was a theoretical, like a practical explanation. However, steel is much costlier than concrete, so we don't use it just about everywhere. We we are careful with steel. Why do we need design? Which I started with, the components individually and the entire structure should withstand the load throughout its lifespan, satisfying serviceability criteria. Yeah, so the now each of the terms we will see in this definition. The components individually means every beam, every column, every floor slab, every foundation every like pile or foundation, whatever we have, all of those individually should withstand the whatever load I'm expecting on it. And the entire structure also has some modes of failure, like without any particular component failing. Like if one column cracks, if one column fails in compression, that is a failure. There can also be some broad failure modes, like the structure undergoing torsion, that sort of thing. So the entire structure as well as all the components individually must withstand the load. And this load comes from the codes throughout its lifespan. So now another there are some other factors that we have to take into account. Like I have a material, I'm calling it, suppose Fe 415, I'm calling it Fe 415 because the ultimate stress is 415, the if 415 megapascal, and the yield stress is 250 megapascal. And that is the strength of my material right now, but 50 years later or 75 years later, will that stay? Because it is undergoing fatigue loading, it is undergoing repeated loading unloading, it can undergo corrosion, it undergoes a lot of fatigue, like degradation in its material over years and years. So every structure when we make it has a lifespan associated with it. And after the lifespan is exhausted, it doesn't mean that we have to destroy the building and make it again, but it means that you have to put the structure through a major proper structural health monitoring study, and you might need major repair. So you have to hire someone, a consultant for that. So throughout it, so what I'm concerned with is if it's a 50, like usually for residential buildings we have a lifespan of 50 years, and for institutional buildings like schools or malls we have 75 years. So we what I'm concerned is with after 50 years the material should still be strong enough to withstand whatever I'm expecting the structure to undergo. And satisfying serviceability criteria. Now there are two types of criteria which a structure, like the demands of a structure which we have to fulfill through design. One is the collapse or the ultimate limit states, which means that the structure obviously should not collapse. A beam should not crack, a column should not be crushed, there should not be any torsion. These are all related to force or stress type of responses. and they are obviously more important, you can say. But serviceability criteria are the ones which are related to the displacements or strains. So serviceability means that the deflection of any particular structural element should not exceed this limit. And this is also important serviceability criteria, because it means that it has to do with what I'm making the structure for. For example, in a residential building, if a suppose a beam has not collapsed but it has deflected a lot, like you can see that the beam is hanging like this. It has not collapsed, so technically nothing has happened, technically everything is fine. But if the beam is hanging like this, then the residents will feel unsafe, and they will probably go for a repair anyway. So that means the serviceability criteria, it will look unsafe. Looking unsafe is also violating serviceability criteria. So that serviceability criteria takes into account that as well. And then, for example, in a factory building, suppose you have a huge crane girder or something, and the deflection of a door of the lintel beam, which the beam just above a door is called a lintel beam. If the lintel beam has deflected somewhat, it obstructs the movement of a crane. That means again it is not again the build, whatever that part was built for, whatever it was supposed to provide this service, it is not providing it. It is violating it. In parking space, if something deflects too much, it can obstruct the headroom of a structure of the vehicles. So that sort of thing are, it's not directly related to the collapse or safety of the structure, but it is related to the serviceability. So that also has to be satisfied. I want that I have to design the entire structure in such a way that all the components individually and the entire structure, none of them collapses, and they also satisfy all the serviceability criteria, and all of this occurs throughout its lifespan. And to properly design a structure, we have to ensure it is economical to construct without compromising safety. So we need to go for cost-effective design. This is another the cost is again another aspect. Suppose I want a structure to be very safe. I'm a very safe player, so I over reinforce the concrete. I increase the dimensions. I make it very stiff, very strong. But then the cost, the material cost, and the construction cost is going to shoot up, and then it won't be viable to construct at all. And we, after all, we are building in any structure we are building with a purpose. So, and to keep it cheap enough, or to reduce the cost, is also a part which we have to keep in mind. We cannot just make the structure infinitely safe. So we have to strike a balance somewhere. And to do that, we need as a civil engineer, as a structural engineer, we need the knowledge of the design procedure in details. We need to know all the avenues that are available to us, so that we can choose a good path to say that it is see, I cannot make it infinitely safe. There will be some compromise somewhere. It is economical enough that I can use, like if I'm a promoter, the building should be economical enough that I can actually sell it off. And at the same time, it should not be so unsafe that it compromises safety. So I have to hit a cost effective design. Now we'll go into steel as a structural material, merits merits and demerits, and then I think the stress strain curves. And yes, that is later. Okay. Steel structures can be easily repaired or retrofitted to carry higher loads. This easy repairing comes because it's not cast as a whole integrated structure like concrete. Steel generally are like individual elements are connected through connections like bolts or welds. So if you want to replace one part, you can just dismantle the connection, take that part out, and replace it. Unlike concrete, where everything like the beams and columns and floors and foundation, everything is cast as a whole, so replacing one part might not be that easy. Steel is also a very eco-friendly material, and steel structures can be easily dismantled and sold as scrap. The life cycle cost of steel structures, which includes the cost of construction, maintenance, repair, and dismantling, can be less than that for concrete structures, because life cycle cost is not the same as construction cost. Construction cost is usually much less for concrete structure because the material itself is much cheaper. But in some cases, you can see that you might see that the entire cost, when you consider all the maintenance and health monitoring parts, it might even get cheaper. As produced in factory under better quality control, steel structures have higher reliability and safety. Now the term reliability, it is not exactly related to this course, but reliability is one of my research areas, so I'll go a little bit into it. Reliability means that now, if now as structural engineers, all we can do is we provide a design. Like I give a design, like I give all the dimensions, materials, connections, everything. I make in a drawing and I submit it. But when the structure is actually being constructed, do you think that it's exactly followed? Most likely it's not. Mostly the construction workers are going to make some shortcuts, they're going to do some more of that, so that introduces an uncertainty into the bit design. Again, when I'm using M25 concrete, I'm saying that the strength of the concrete is 25 MPa, but after all, concrete is a mixture of many materials like cement, water, coarse aggregate, fine aggregates. So again, it's not so perfect that everywhere, every part of the concrete, all the concrete that I'm using will exactly have 25 megapascal strength. It can have some less, some more. Like probability and uncertainty is inbuilt into, like, it's inherent in every natural process. So even if there is no corruption going on in the structural process, any material cannot be so ideal that all the material that's being provided in a factory or being mixed at the site will have the exact strength which I'm expecting. There will, some parts will be higher, some parts will be lower. So inherently the uncertainty is being introduced, and reliability basically considers that everything is uncertain. It takes a mean and a standard deviation associated with all the properties, like all the dimensions, all the materials, and it says that, I mean, I won't go into the detail, but reliability technically means the safety. Like it gives us some measure of safety, of how much I can rely on the estimates. So naturally, the more amount of quality control you have in a place, the higher the reliability will be. So it's likely that when it's made in a, like, all steels, the steel elements are usually made in a factory, there is a lot more supervision in a factory, lot more quality control, so it will have more reliability rather than if you are mixing the concrete at the site and just casting it. You can see that it's much harder to control. So as produced in factory under better quality control, steel structures have higher reliability and safety. There are some demerits as well. Steel is a costlier material, obviously. To get the most benefit out of steel, structures should be protected to resist corrosion. It must also be protected from fire. Good quality control is essential to ensure proper fitting of the various structural elements. So this comes under connection design. As I said, concrete buildings are cast as a whole. So the connection, like the rigidity of the connections, like a beam column connection. So whatever I want the beam and the beam column connection to be rigid. So if I'm casting everything together, the automatically it is cast out as a rigid structure. But in steel, I have a separate. I have some section which is the column. I have a section which is the beam, and I have to design the connection also. I have to bolt them together so that it is rigid. It doesn't have any movement between. Like it does not allow any movement. So connection design is very important in steel. And effects of temperature should be considered in design, because you know that temperature coefficient alpha, which is like alpha into delta T, is the strain developed in any material. If there is a delta T increase or decrease in temperature, every material has a coefficient of thermal expansion called alpha, which is like denoted by alpha. So alpha delta T, so that is quite high for steel, like alpha. So we have to consider the effects of expansion and contraction, like in the that, like, temperature increase and decrease can also introduce a tension or compression in the material, no? So we have to consider that. And to prevent development of cracks under fatigue and earthquake loads, connection, in particular welds, should be designed and detailed properly. Next week we'll look at connections. We'll start looking at connections. It's a very important topic. Okay, now just some curiosity's sake, the world's most famous steel structures. The Beijing National Stadium, also known as the Bosnia Stadium, it took 5 years to complete, and it was China's centerpiece for the 2018 Olympic Games. It is an architectural wonder, constructed with more than 42,000 tons of steel. It is the largest steel structure in the world. You can see this. Then this is a very iconic building, the Empire State Building. It was constructed in 1931. The building's steel frame weighs 57,000 tons, while the Art Deco exterior is composed of 2 lakh cubic feet of limestone and granite, 10 million bricks, and 730 tons of aluminum and stainless steel. And it just took 13 months to build. The Sydney Harbour Bridge. Yeah, now bridges are a very very important part of it, and even in India, in postcards and all that, you will see bridges like the Howrah Bridge and all that. Those are like bridges become a icon of a place, and bridges are very commonly made of steel. So steel trusses or steel arches. This is the Sydney Harbour Bridge is the world's largest steel bridge, and is the most renowned international symbol of Australia. These things also matter. Like a structure, of course, there are some basic requirement or need for the structure, that ultimately the bridge is there to connect two places. But becoming a symbol and all also matters. The total steelwork weighs this much, and its 49-meter wide deck carries an incredible 8 lanes of traffic, two train lines, a footpath, and a cycle path. You can imagine how wide that is. Then the Khalifa, obviously, it's the world's tallest man-made structure. It's also, see, all the extremely high structures, extremely tall skyscraper sort of structures are made of steel. The Brooklyn Bridge, it's a cable stayed bridge, suspension bridge. So suspension bridge means that it has two cables like this, and then there are vertical cables holding it up. The steel is so thick and the construction is so challenging. It took a decade to complete, but it is very old. It was made in the 19th century. This is another, the Taipei 101 Tower, China Square Tower, and most of these are towers or bridges. Okay, and then this is a technical part of it again. Mechanical properties of steel. How do we characterize a material? So physical properties of structural steel as detailed by clause 2.2.4.1 of IS 800. Okay, IS 800 2007. Everyone, I think this has had a revision in 2016. One second. Okay, so 2025 a draft is going on. I don't think it's available yet. So 2007 one will follow. So you must all have this code with you, because a lot of the clauses are going to be referred in the course taught by Professor Maiti also. And in any questions, if you are solving any questions or all, you will need to refer it. It is the Indian standard code for steel design. All countries have this kind of codes. Like America has American Institute for Steel Construction, AISC codes. We call all our codes is like named by IS, Indian standard, and then they have numbers. 800 is the number of the code, and 2007 is the year of it was published in. So now this is a particular clause. I'll open it. Maybe it will help. Okay, I don't have it here. I'll try to get it by next class. So there is a clause which says that irrespective of its grade, these are some physical properties that can be taken constant, like the unit mass or the density rho, which is 7850 kg per meter cube. Why do we need the density? We need it to calculate the self weight. So basically, mass is volume into density. When I'm proposing a structure, I know the dimensions. I'm proposing the dimensions. So if I have the length and the width and the depth, I will calculate the volume of the of some structural element. I will multiply it with the density and find the mass, and then I will multiply it with g to get the weight. So that is the dead load basically. Softwares like STAT do all this internally, but when you are doing it by hand, you have to calculate the actual dead load and take it as a downward load, gravity loading. Modulus of elasticity, Young's modulus, 200, it's 200 megapascal, or 2 into 10 to the power 5 Newton per millimeter square. So again, one thing I'll mention is stick to a particular unit system and be very very careful about units. So whether you are writing kilonewton or Newton, whether you are writing meter or millimeter, make a habit of always mention the unit whenever you are writing something, writing any value. The Young's modulus is basically the stiffness, right? It is the slope of the stress strain curve. So that is a very important property which we'll look at in a while when we look at the stress strain curve. Poisson's ratio mu is zero point 0.3. Now the Young's modulus and the Poisson's ratio together characterize a homogeneous material. This is basically the constitutive law of any material has three sorts of, like, that stress is stiffness into strain. So the stiffness term is what connects stress and strain. Any structure has a stress type response and a strain type response, and the stiffness, it what connects the two. So the stiffness term you would have seen coming in structural analysis course when you were doing unit load method. You would have seen this property coming in the Young's modulus. And for homogeneous materials, we assume that homogeneous means that at every point in the material the stiffness is constant, and for every direction also, like all the directions. Homogeneous isotropic materials, they are a material is completely characterized by its stiffness and Pearson's ratio. So these two values are fixed for steel. Then modulus of rigidity, G is, see, E, if you know E and mu, you can actually calculate G by some formula. It is connected, like these three are not independent, any two of these are independent. Modulus of rigidity, G is this 76.9 megapascal. Coefficient of thermal expansion alpha is 12 into 10 to the minus 6 per degree centigrade. So, as I said, the thermal strain developed in a structure is alpha into delta T. So, delta T has unit degree centigrade, and alpha has the unit of something per degree centigrade. So, alpha into delta T multiplies to give us a unitless quantity, and strain is a unitless quantity. Strain is delta L by L. So, that's why we need the alpha to find out the thermal strain developed in the structure. Now, the principal mechanical properties of structural steel important in design are yield stress Fy and tensile or ultimate stress Fu. We haven't spoken of those yet. They are related to the grade of the steel. See here, the first line says that physical properties of structural steel, irrespective of its grade, may be taken as these. These five are fixed irrespective of the grade, but the grade controls the Fy and Fu, and these two are very important in the when you are designing, when you are solving the design equations. You will see that this Fy and Fu keep cropping. These don't as much. The other five properties, they are not directly related to the design calculations, though they are relevant in the larger scheme of things. Now, this is a concept which you have not encountered in design of concrete structures. It's a concept of like steel sections. Concrete doesn't have fixed sections. We decide on the dimensions, we decide on the width and the depth, and we can make it whatever we want. Like I think there is one clause in the IS 456 that says that the smaller dimension of the column has to be 300 or more. So that is one criteria, but you can do it 315, 320, 350. Like you can make any combination of width and depth, but steel is not like that. Since steel is like it's constructed in, it's rolled, it's like it's made in the factory and then shipped to the site. Now the Bureau of Indian Standards, BIS, publishes IS handbook 1 that tabulates weight per unit length, geometric dimension, and other dimensions of various types of steel sections. So there are some fixed dimension combinations. It's it's not like it's physically impossible to make a section of any combination you want, but usually in the factory some standardized sections are made, some sections are rolled out, and those are used. So this is a I section. Of one of the most common sections is an I section, or a joist, joist. What are the properties? And again, in concrete it's very simple, like it is just usually rectangular sections or square sections. Here we have very specific sections. So this is the cross section. Okay, like if this is a beam, this is a length, but here this is the cross section. So for concrete it is usually rectangular, but a steel section looks like an I section here. Like next time you uh, go to a railway station, look at the foot over bridge or any bridge. Next time you go to look at the truss members and all, you will see that they are not rectangular members. They have this kind of flanges and webs, and they're visible also. If you just keep an eye open, you will see all this around you. So this is a flange. The horizontal members are called flange. The vertical member is the web. So later we'll see that flanges usually take most of the bending moment, and web usually takes most of the shear force. And flange has a width. This is the width. B is half the width, and TF is thickness of flange, and D is the overall depth of the section, and TW is thickness of the web. So, and then there is also a grade like this. It's not exactly rectangle, rectangle, rectangle. It has a slope like this. So all of these properties, like you will have some geometric properties which distinguishes a particular section. So this IS handbook 1 or SP6, it's called SP6, that has all these like details. Like for a particular, all of the sections have a name, and all the geometric properties, like in a table all the geometric properties are given. And then some other properties like yeah, like moment of inertia, Ixx, Iyy, those are given, and weight, and a lot of other properties like the center of gravity. It will be much clearer if I have it somewhere. Okay, so it is available on the internet. Okay, so let's look at this. This is a I section. This is an I section which we just talked about. So all the parameters, like all the dimensions, have been marked here. And then this is the first page, like this is the left hand side page. So it has a designation ISJB 150, Indian Standard Junior Beam 150. This is the name of a particular section, and all the properties are given along this table. So see, cross sectional area, weight per unit length, depth of section H. Here it's marked. This overall end to end depth is H. Width of flange is 50. So this thickness is 50. Width of thickness of web is 3 millimeters. So this thickness is 3 millimeter. So if you read this row, if you read the row corresponding to ISJB, you will get all the properties related to this section. So moment of inertia, radius of gyration, we have center of, there is there should be okay, this is a symmetric section, so the center of mass is exactly at the center. Then we have some connection details, maximum sign of, like a lot of details are given here. So you can go down this code once. You can see that all of these, like the left hand side pages have the designation, and then it goes along in a continuous way, like the left page and the right page all have a continuous row where all these properties are listed. These are I sections. Then let's go for some, these are L sections, angle sections. Then there are channel sections. Let's see. These are channel sections, like, oh no, this is a bulb angle. These are T sections. So there are a lot of sections, and all of these details are given here, given in the code, which you, and obviously you are not required to memorize these things. These are just, you have to refer the code as and when you need. This is I section, and this is a C section. C section will have an additional property. See, this section is symmetric about the x-axis, but it is not symmetric along the y-axis. So the cxx will also be a parameter which will be mentioned in every row corresponding to a channel section. This is an angle section. This is a T section. Then there are some closed section, hollow sections, like a square, rectangle, circle, circular, and then there are some bars, square, circular, flats, and plates. They're very thin and small kind of things. Designation of common IS rolled steel section, joists or I section. ISJB is Indian Standard Junior Beam. ISLB is Indian Standard Light Beam. ISMB is very common, the most common I think, Indian Standard Medium Beam. Then Indian Standard Heavy Beam. ISHB, mostly used as column section. And ISWB is Indian Standard Wide Flange Beam. All of these will be in SP6. Then channels or C sections are ISJC, ISLC, ISMC, ISHC. This is how they look like. This is see, this is how they look like. And if you next time you cross a bridge, make sure you look at the truss member or truss or whatever construction it is, so that you can spot this kind of structures. This is a channel section. This is a T section. This is a, see, the length is usually like, we can take however much we want. We have like in a factory you have very very long sections, and you can cut them whatever length you want, but the cross section is what is usually fixed by the standard. Yeah. This is a T section. This is angle section. Angle sections can have equal length, and they can be unequal length. And these are bars. These are flats and plates, sheets, strip, all of this. And then there are built up sections. Built up sections are sections which are built from existing sections. The properties are calculated based on the properties and dimensions of the source sections and assembly seams. This is like this. Suppose I have an I section and it is not enough. I started with saying that in design is an iterative process. I propose some connections, I propose some dimensions, and then I see that it is failing, in the sense that suppose the developed stress is greater than the yield stress, or the developed deflection is greater than my deflection criteria or deflection limit. So in that case, I have to give a stronger section, maybe a stronger material, a larger dimension, and check if it is good again. So suppose I see that the I section is failing, but I don't want to give a larger I section. I just reinforce it with a C here. If I see that this is going to be sufficient, so I have to connect these two though. Like during construction, you have to weld or bolt them together. a C section with a C cap, I section with an I cap. Then this is an I shape with reinforcing plates. So an you have and then you put two plates on top and bottom. So you reinforce the flange. So the flange usually takes the bending moment and the web usually takes the shear force. Suppose I see that in a particular I section, the it's failing in bending moment, but the shear force is enough. Like it is enough to take the shear force. Then I don't need to go for a larger I section. I can just reinforce the flanges a little bit with two flats. Then you can also reinforce it in as many ways as you want. So this part, then here we have flexibility. Like usually the individual sections are standardized, but I can play around with them, I can build them, I can join them, I can make them stronger as per I need. Now we come to a very important topic, the stress strain curve or the elasticity curve of steel. It is a very important topic for exams like GATE as well, like in the like MCQ type exams or any exams. You need to know the characterization of the stress strain curve. So the stress strain curve is we plot stress on the y-axis and we plot strain on the x-axis, and it goes something like this. Up to A, it goes in a straight line. So let's see. A is the limit of proportionality, the point where the linear nature of the stress strain curve ceases. Like up to this point, it is a straight line. Then it starts becoming non-linear. Like it's not stress is no longer proportional to strain. And the Young's modulus, that E quantity which is 200 megapascal, which we took, E is the slope of the straight line path. Slope means that for every like this, you know what slope means, right? The tan theta of this line. But after A, that Young's modulus no longer holds. Like the stiffness changes. So A to B is a very small zone where it is not linear, it is not a straight line, but it is still elastic. So it means that B is the elastic limit, the limiting point for the condition that material behaves elastically. But Hooke's law does not apply. What is Hooke's law? Hooke's law says that stress is proportional to strain. So long as it is a straight line, Hooke's law is applicable. Up to A, Hooke's law is applicable. After A to B is non-linear, but it is still elastic. What does elasticity mean? Elasticity means that if you remove the load, the entire like the unloading path exactly follows this diagram and returns to the origin here. So if I take it up to B and then I remove the stress, then the entire structure will, like the entire material will come back to its original configuration. So the strain will become zero again. Like it will just come back along this B to O origin path. So for most practical purposes, it can be assumed that A and B are the same point. But this means that beyond B, what happens is beyond elastic limit, there will be some permanent deformation or permanent set when the load is removed. That means that the strain will never again come back to zero if I load it beyond B once. So if I go into the non-elastic zone, I can never regain the exact original configuration again. C and D are the upper yield point and lower yield points. Again, they are also very closely spaced, so you can say this, they are almost the same. Points after which strain increases without correspondingly high increase in load or stress. That means that there is a sharp fall in the slope. The slope, see here, the slope was very like it was a very steep graph, and then suddenly it falls like this. Like beyond C and D, which are very closely spaced, you see that there is a very sharp decrease in the slope. So the material has yielded. We use the term the material has yielded. It has not failed yet, it has yielded. That means that the yield limit has been crossed, the yield limit has been crossed. So that means that it will, like for a small increase in strain, the stress for a small increase in stress, the strain will increase rapidly, because that is what it means, right? As the slope becomes flatter, it means that if the stress increases a little bit, the strain increases a lot. So the material is rapidly deforming now. After yielding, it rapidly deforms. Then E is the most critical point. E is the ultimate or maximum tensile stress point. That is where we consider failure is. Like if the material has failed, if it has reached E, after that you see that even with an increase in stress, the strain is increasing. So the material has failed now. So one critical point is the yield stress point, which is here, and the next critical point is the ultimate stress point, which is E, which is here. So here, let's say when we saw the mechanical properties of steel, we saw this. Principal mechanical properties of structural steel important in design are yield stress Fy and ultimate or tensile stress Fu. So this Fy, the stress corresponding to C is Fy, and the stress corresponding to E is Fu. They are very important in the context of design. And F is the fracture point, the point where the material breaks. But F is not the failure point, because you see, once you have loaded it beyond E, the material cannot take any more stress. It is literally, the stress is even if the stress decreases, the strain will increase, and ultimately it's going to fracture anyway. So that's why E is the critical point. The highest point in the stress strain curve is the most critical point, the ultimate stress point. And how do we get this graph? We get this graph by a standard tensile test. It is done like we take a cylindrical specimen. See, it was not in this shape to begin with. I take a cylindrical specimen and then I put it in a testing machine and I apply a tensile force in increments. Like in certain increments, I'm going to increase the tension slowly, and at every increment I'm going to note down what force I'm applying, and I'm going to have some device like a strain gauge to measure the strain or the displacement. So then so then I'm noting down for every tensile increment. I give a tension, I note down the tension and the strain, then I increase it again, I note down the load and the strain. Like that, suppose I have 10 points, and then to plot this I will, graphical plotting, like I have xy coordinate pairs and I will plot that and join them approximately and see how it looks like. So for that, if I have the load values P, and since the cross sectional area here is, I know the cross sectional area, so P by A is the stress. So on the y axis I will plot the P by A values, and on the x axis I'm going to plot the strain values. That is how I'm going to end up with this graph. You would have probably, if you are in a, like if you are doing UG in civil engineering, you would have done this tensile strengths test somewhere maybe. But yes, you should know the names of these points and the significance of these points for competitive exams particularly. Okay, so that's all for today. This was an introductory class. Next class, I guess we are starting with connections. So are there any questions? If you don't have any question, you can leave. I'll wait for some time to see if anyone has it.
Excuse me, madam.
Yes.
Madam, we are using a pre-stressed also, madam. In that pre-stressed steels are coming.
Yes, what? Pre-stressed what?
You are comparing with the concrete only. Concrete means not mention the pre-stressed concrete. The pre-stressed in the pre-stressed concrete, the high tensile wires are used.
In pre-stressed what is you? Can you write in the chat box? Your voice is a little unclear.
Okay, madam. I will send you.
Here. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll end the class. We'll meet again next Tuesday.